Hey everyone, welcome to Lurking Shadows. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Here, we explore the darkest and most spine-chilling real-life horror stories out there. For those of you returning, it's great to have you back, my friends. In today's video, we're venturing into unsettling tales from the Yukon wilderness, where the frozen silence hides sinister stalkers and eerie presences that haunt the endless nights. These stories are as mysterious as they are terrifying. The rugged beauty of the Yukon conceals a darkness that's not easily explained. If you've been here for a while, hold on tight, as I'm already working on fresh new stories that will haunt you. And if you're just joining us, thank you for stopping by. I hope you enjoy these tales as much as I did in gathering and sharing them. Remember, viewer discretion is advised. My name is Edgar Millen, and I was a constable with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in the Yukon Territory during the harsh winter of 1931 to 1932. I had been stationed in the remote northern outposts for nearly a decade by then, patrolling vast stretches of frozen wilderness where the cold could kill a man faster than any bullet, and where isolation bred a kind of madness that no city dweller could comprehend. I had seen my share of tragedies: trappers lost to blizzards, miners crushed in cave-ins, indigenous hunters vanishing into the endless white without a trace. But nothing prepared me for the hunt that became known as the Mad Trapper Case, a pursuit that dragged us through sub-zero hell and revealed a human evil so unyielding, so inexplicably savage, that it still claws at my mind in the dead of night. This is the true account of Albert Johnson, the man who defied death, logic, and every law of nature, turning the Arctic barrens into a graveyard of broken men and shattered sanity. What started as a simple investigation into trapline thefts escalated into a 48-day manhunt across 150 miles of unforgiving terrain, where temperatures plunged to -50 degrees Fahrenheit, and where Johnson's impossible endurance suggested something far darker than a mere criminal on the run, perhaps a force that wasn't entirely human. It all began in the summer of 1931, when reports trickled in from the Fort McPherson area along the Rat River. Trappers in the region, mostly indigenous Gwich'in people who had lived off the land for generations, complained that their traplines were being raided. Valuable furs, marten, fox, beaver, were disappearing, and the traps themselves were being tampered with in ways that showed deliberate malice. The culprit was described as a tall, broad-shouldered stranger with piercing blue eyes, a man who spoke to no one and seemed to materialize from the shadows of the forest. He had arrived in the area without fanfare, building a small cabin on the banks of the Rat River, and he carried high-powered rifles that no ordinary trapper could afford. His name, we later learned, was Albert Johnson, though whether that was his true identity remains a mystery to this day. No records of him existed before his appearance in the Yukon, and his fingerprints matched no known criminal databases when checked posthumously by the RCMP archives. By December 1931, the complaints turned deadly. On New Year's Eve, Constable Alfred Spike King and I were dispatched from Aklavik to investigate after a Gwich'in trapper named John Baptiste reported seeing Johnson near his disturbed lines. We skied and snowshoed our way to Johnson's cabin, a crude structure of logs and sod that blended into the snowdrifts like a predator's lair. The air was so cold it burned the lungs, and the wind howled like distant screams echoing off the barren hills. When we arrived, Johnson was inside, but he refused to open the door despite our calls. We could see smoke curling from the chimney, hear faint movements within, shuffling feet, the click of a rifle bolt. King, a veteran officer with nerves of steel, decided to force entry, suspecting Johnson might be holding stolen goods or worse. What happened next unfolded in a blur of violence that still replays in my nightmares with crystalline clarity. King kicked at the door, and it gave way just enough for him to peer inside. In that instant, a shotgun blast erupted from the darkness, slamming into King's abdomen like a thunderclap. He staggered back, blood blooming across his parka and a horrifying red stain against the white snow. I fired my revolver through the opening, but Johnson was already moving, a shadow darting with unnatural speed. Another shot from inside grazed my shoulder, the pain like fire ripping through flesh. I dragged King away as best I could, his moans cutting through the wind, his blood trail steaming in the frozen air. We retreated to a nearby indigenous camp, where locals helped us fashion a sled to transport King back to Aklavik. The journey was agony, 48 miles of relentless cold, with King's wounds festering, his fever rising as infection set in. He died 3 days later in the hospital, his last words a whispered curse against the man who had gunned him down without mercy or motive. The RCMP mobilized immediately. A posse was formed, including myself, Constable Joe Bernard, and several special constables from the local communities, armed with rifles, dog sleds, and dynamite. We returned to Johnson's cabin on January 4, 1932, determined to bring him in dead or alive. But he was gone, vanished into the wilderness with only the essentials, his rifles, ammunition, and a backpack. The cabin revealed chilling details, no personal effects, no letters, no signs of normal human habitation. Just traps, furs that matched the stolen ones, and a collection of teeth, animal teeth, we assumed at first, but some looked disturbingly human-like, though forensic reports later confirmed they were from wildlife, as documented in RCMP case file #1932-01-04. What struck us most was his silence. Neighbors reported he never spoke, not even to barter. It was as if he existed outside humanity, a silent specter haunting the frozen north. The manhunt began in earnest, a grueling chase through the Richardson Mountains and along the Rat River's icy banks. Johnson traveled on foot, without dogs or snowshoes at first, yet he outpaced our sled teams day after day. The temperatures hovered at -40 to -50 degrees, winds whipping snow into blinding whiteouts that erased tracks within hours. We dynamited his suspected hiding spots, canyons, thickets of willow, hoping to flush him out, but he always slipped away. On January 7th, we cornered him in a bend of the river, exchanging gunfire across the ice. Bullets whizzed past, cracking the frozen surface like thunder. Johnson fired back with deadly accuracy, wounding one of our dogs and forcing us to retreat. His shots seemed to come from nowhere, his position shifting like a ghost in the storm. As the days dragged into weeks, the pursuit took a toll that went beyond physical exhaustion. The cold seeped into our bones, causing frostbite that blackened fingers and toes. 2 men lost digits to amputation back in Aklavik. But worse was the psychological unraveling. Johnson never tired, never faltered. He doubled back on his tracks, creating loops that led us in circles for days. He survived without fire, leaving no smoke trails, eating raw squirrel and ptarmigan we found gutted along his path. How could a man endure such conditions? Historical records from the RCMP logs note his footprints showed no signs of stumbling, even after 20-mile marches in deep snow. Paranoia set in among the posse. Whispers spread that he wasn't human, a Wendigo from indigenous legends, a flesh-eating spirit born of the cold, or perhaps a escaped lunatic with superhuman resilience. I recall nights huddled in our tents, the wind moaning like tormented souls, convinced I heard his footsteps circling just beyond the firelight. By late January, we enlisted aerial support, a first in Canadian manhunt history. Pilot Wilfred Wap May, famous for his World War I exploits, flew a Belenka monoplane from Edmonton, dropping supplies and scouting from above. On January 30th, May spotted Johnson crossing the barren tundra toward the Yukon River, his figure a lone black speck against the endless white. We closed in, but Johnson turned the tables, ambushing us from a snowdrift. Gunfire erupted, Constable Spike MacDonald's dog was killed, and bullets tore through our packs. Johnson's aim was infernal, precise, unrelenting, as if he anticipated every move. The chase crossed into the Yukon territory, Johnson forging ahead with impossible stamina. He fashioned crude snowshoes from bent branches, evading our planes by traveling at night under the aurora's eerie glow. The northern lights danced like mocking spirits, illuminating a landscape of frozen rivers and jagged peaks that seemed to conspire against us. On February 7th, we trapped him in a canyon, but he scaled sheer cliffs in the Dak, disappearing into the mist. 3 days later, on February 17th, 1932, the end came on the frozen Middle River. May's plane herded him into open ground, where our posse, now reinforced, surrounded him. Johnson fought like a demon, firing over 40 rounds from his .30-30 Winchester and .22 Savage rifles. Bullets hailed. Constable Hersey was wounded in the knee, another in the chest. Johnson took hits but kept standing, blood soaking the snow, until a final barrage felled him. Approaching his body was a moment of visceral dread. He lay face down, his pack containing gold dust worth thousands, likely from illegal claims, and no identification. His teeth were perfect, no fillings, suggesting he hadn't seen civilization in years. Autopsy reports from the Yukon Coroner's Office, 1932, revealed he had subsisted on minimal food, his stomach containing only squirrel guts, yet his muscles were unatrophied, his body showing no signs of the starvation that should have claimed him weeks prior. He had covered 150 miles in 48 days, in conditions that killed hardened trappers in hours. Who was he? Fingerprints yielded no matches. Theories ranged from a Russian escapee to a deranged prospector, but no answers emerged. Indigenous elders spoke of him as a Naoni, a valley spirit that lures men to doom. The hunt claimed lives beyond Johnson's victims. Exhaustion and cold hospitalized several officers, and the psychological scars lingered. I retired soon after, haunted by visions of his silent, unyielding form vanishing into the blizzard. The mad trapper's grave in Aklavik Cemetery remains a site of uneasy pilgrimage, where visitors report feeling watched, as if his defiance echoes from the permafrost. This true tale, documented in RCMP archives and maze flight logs, warns that in the Yukon's frozen isolation, some evils don't die, they endure, breeding paranoia and doom in the endless white. My name is Morgan, and I am one of the current owners of the Caribou Hotel in Carcross, Yukon Territory. I purchased the property in 2013 with my partner Jamie Toole, drawn by its rich Klondike Gold Rush history and the promise of restoring a piece of Yukon's past to its former glory. We had heard the whispers of ghost stories. Of course, every old building in these parts has them, but we dismissed them as colorful folklore meant to entice tourists. Carcross is a remote village, nestled between Bennett Lake and Nares Lake, where the wind howls through the valleys like a perpetual lament, and the isolation can play tricks on the mind. Little did we know that the hotel's history of fire, murder, and untimely deaths had woven a tapestry of terror that would ensnare us, turning our dream into a nightmare of creeping paranoia and unrelenting dread. This is the true account of the hauntings that plague the Caribou Hotel, documented through eyewitness reports, historical records from the Yukon Register of Historic Places, and our own harrowing experiences that have left us questioning the boundary between the living and the dead. What began as subtle anomalies escalated into manifestations so visceral, so inescapably malevolent, that they drove us to the brink of madness in the frozen solitude of the Yukon wilderness. The Caribou Hotel's story starts in the feverish days of the Klondike Gold Rush in 1898, when thousands of stampeders flooded into the Yukon, chasing dreams of fortune amid the brutal northern landscape. Originally built as the Anderson Hotel by Dawson Charlie Tagish, a Tagish First Nation man who had co-discovered the gold that sparked the rush, the building was a beacon for weary travelers arriving via the White Pass and Yukon Route Railway. Carcross, then called Caribou Crossing, was a vital stopover, its name derived from the massive caribou herds that once migrated through the area. The hotel burned down in 1903, only to be rebuilt and renamed the Caribou Hotel by new owners. It survived another fire in 1909, rising again like a phoenix from the ashes, its sturdy wooden frame a testament to the resilience required to endure the Yukon's merciless winters. Historical photos from the Yukon archives show its three-story facade, with wide verandas overlooking the frozen lakes, a place where prospectors shared tales of hardship over whiskey, oblivious to the shadows gathering within its walls. By the 1920s, the hotel had passed into the hands of Edwin William Gideon and his wife Bessie. Edwin, a stern man with a background in mining, managed the day-to-day operations, while Bessie, a kind-hearted woman from Ontario, handled the guests with a warmth that belied the harsh surroundings. But tragedy struck on October 27, 1928, when Edwin died suddenly in the hotel. Some say from a heart attack exacerbated by the isolation and stress, others whisper of something more sinister, like a curse tied to the land's indigenous spirits disturbed by the gold rush invasions. Bessie continued running the hotel alone, her grief palpable in the quiet corridors. Exactly 5 years later, on October 27, 1933, Bessie herself perished in room 7 on the second floor. The coroner's report, as preserved in Yukon historical records, lists pneumonia as the cause, but locals spoke of her wasting away from a broken heart, her final days marked by feverish delusions of Edwin calling to her from the shadows. Since then, Bess's ghost has been reported by countless witnesses, a shy spirit, they say, who manifests as a fleeting shadow in mirrors, a soft sigh in empty rooms, or the gentle closing of doors that should remain locked. We didn't believe any of it when we took over. The hotel had fallen into disrepair after a series of eccentric owners, including Polly the parrot's infamous tenure in the 1940s. Polly, owned by a colorful proprietor named Fred Polly Pollock, was a foul-mouthed bird that cursed at guests and mimicked cries of distress, adding to the hotel's eerie reputation. But the real darkness resurfaced in 2004, when owner Bob Olson was murdered in the building just before Christmas. According to RCMP reports detailed in Yukon news articles from August 15, 2019, Olson was bludgeoned to death in a dispute, his body discovered in a pool of blood on the main floor. The killer was convicted, but the violence seemed to awaken something dormant. The hotel sat vacant for years, its windows like empty eyes staring out over the desolate landscape, until we arrived with hammers and paint, intent on revival. Our first inkling of trouble came during renovations in the summer of 2014. Carcross is isolated, population barely 300, with the nearest major town, Whitehorse, 70 kilometers away via a winding highway that ices over in winter, cutting us off like a frozen tomb. We were alone in the hotel most days, the silence broken only by the creak of old timbers settling in the wind. Jamie was upstairs in room 7, Bess's death chamber, stripping wallpaper that peeled away in brittle sheets, revealing faded inscriptions scratched into the wood, names of long-dead guests, dates from the 1890s. He called me up, his voice unsteady, to show me a cold spot in the corner, where the temperature plummeted 20 degrees despite the summer heat filtering through the windows. As we stood there, a mirror on the wall fogged over, as if breathed upon by invisible lips, and in the condensation, a faint outline appeared, a woman's face, eyes wide with unspoken sorrow. We laughed it off as a draft, but that night, as we slept in the downstairs parlor, footsteps echoed above, slow, deliberate paces tracing the hallway, pausing outside room 7 before retreating. No one else was in the building. We checked every room, every closet, the paranoia setting in like frost on glass. As winter descended in 2015, the manifestations intensified, amplifying the isolation that grips Carcross like a vice. The Yukon winter is a beast, days shorten to mere hours of twilight, temperatures drop to -30 Celsius, and blizzards bury the world in white silence. Guests were few, mostly adventurous tourists seeking the haunted experience we marketed lightly on our website. One couple, from Vancouver, checked into room 7 on a stormy November night. They reported hearing whispers through the walls, Bess's voice, soft and pleading, murmuring "Edwin, stay," followed by the sound of a door slamming repeatedly, though all doors were secure. In the morning, they fled, leaving behind a journal entry we found later, scratches on the bedpost, as if clawed by desperate fingers, and a blood-like stain on the sheets that vanished upon washing. We dismissed it as hysteria, but then the parrot's legacy resurfaced. Polly had died decades ago, but one evening, as I tended the bar in the Surly Bird Saloon, named after the bird, a cacophony erupted from the empty cage display, curses in a raspy voice, "Damn you to hell," interspersed with screams that mimicked a woman's dying gasps. The sound system was off, no recordings existed. Jamie and I searched the building, hearts pounding, the dread building as shadows seemed to elongate in the flickering lantern light, whispering suggestions of abandonment, of joining the eternal residence. The true horror peaked in December 2016, echoing the anniversary of Olson's murder. We had a single guest, a historian researching gold rush deaths, staying in room 12 on the 3rd floor. That night, a blizzard raged, winds battering the hotel like vengeful fists, power flickering out to plunge us into darkness lit only by emergency candles. Around midnight, screams tore through the halls, not human, but avian, Polly's curses morphing into agonized wails. The guest pounded on our door, face ashen, claiming a woman in Victorian attire had appeared at his bedside, her eyes hollow sockets, reaching out with skeletal hands that passed through his flesh, leaving icy burns. We rushed upstairs, but the room was empty, save for a shattered mirror and frost patterns on the window spelling "Leave or join us." Paranoia gripped us. Every creak became a footstep, every gust of breath on our necks. The guest vanished the next morning, his car gone, but footprints in the snow led back to the hotel's rear entrance, circling endlessly before disappearing into thin air. RCMP searched but found no trace, classifying it as a weather-related disappearance, though locals whispered of the hotel claiming another soul. Our own encounters grew visceral. In 2018, during a quiet spell, I awoke to pressure on my chest, as if pinned by unseen weight. Bess's face hovered inches away, pale, translucent, lips moving soundlessly in accusation. The room reeked of decay, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood, reminiscent of Olson's murder scene described in police files. Jamie experienced visions, Edwin Gideon, pacing the veranda, his form charred from the 1909 fire, flames licking at his spectral clothes. We consulted paranormal investigators, as reported in What's Up Yukon magazine, who captured EVP's electronic voice phenomena, whispering murder, fire, stay forever. The recordings, analyzed by experts, matched historical accounts of Bess's voice from old radio interviews. Isolation amplified the terror. With roads impassable, we were trapped with the entities, their presence a constant itch in our minds, breeding doubt. Were we going mad, or was the hotel alive, feeding on our fear? By 2019, as detailed in CBC News reports from July 17th, we reopened the bar, hoping activity would dispel the spirits. But it invited more. Patrons reported glasses shattering spontaneously, spilling red wine like blood, and shadows detaching from walls to pursue them down hallways. One night, a group of locals heard pounding from the basement, where Olson's body was found, escalating to guttural roars that shook the foundation. We evacuated, but upon return, found claw marks on the doors, deep gouges defying explanation. The Yukon Register of Historic Places lists the hotel as protected, but we know it's the spirits protecting their domain, dooming intruders to eternal vigilance. Today, the hauntings persist, a cycle of dread in the Yukon's unforgiving wilds. Bess's shy spirit has turned vengeful, her sorrow a trap for the living. We've considered selling, but the hotel clings, whispering inevitabilities of doom. This true tale, verified by historical documents and eyewitness testimonies, warns that some places hoard their dead, their isolation a prison where paranoia festers, and the uncanny claims all who linger. My name is Raymond Patterson, and I am a retired park ranger who served in Nahanni National Park Reserve in Canada's Northwest Territories from 1985 to 2010. Though the valley technically falls outside the Yukon Territory, its eastern edges brush against the Yukon's wild borders, and the horrors that unfold there have spilled over into Yukon lore for generations, whispered among trappers and indigenous elders in places like Watson Lake and Ross River. I came to the Nahanni seeking solitude after a career in urban law enforcement, drawn by its UNESCO World Heritage status and the promise of pristine wilderness, towering canyons, thundering waterfalls like Virginia Falls, twice the height of Niagara, and rivers that carve through ancient karst landscapes like veins of forgotten blood. But what I encountered during my tenure was a legacy of inexplicable deaths, decapitations, and disappearances that defy rational explanation, turning the valley into a labyrinth of visceral dread where isolation breeds paranoia, and the uncanny whispers of the dead promise inevitable doom. This is the true account of the Nahanni Valley, known as the Valley of Headless Men, grounded in historical records from Parks Canada archives, RCMP case files, and my own eyewitness experiences that have left me haunted by shadows that seem to follow me even now, in the safety of retirement. What began as scattered prospector tales in the early 1900s has persisted into modern times, a curse that claims lives with surgical precision, leaving bodies mutilated and heads vanished, as if the land itself hungers for the essence of human thought. The Nahanni's dark history traces back millennia to the Dean First Nations, who called the area Naha Dehi, meaning river of the land of the Naha people. Indigenous oral traditions, documented in ethnographic studies by the Canadian Museum of History, speak of the valley as a forbidden zone haunted by malevolent spirits, Naha warriors, fierce guardians who decapitated intruders to protect sacred sites. These legends warned against venturing deep into the canyons, where hot springs bubble like cauldrons of the underworld and caves gape like maws ready to swallow the unwary. But the white man's greed ignored such cautions during the Klondike Gold Rush spillover in the late 1890s, when prospectors from Yukon camps pushed northward, lured by rumors of untapped veins in the Nahanni's remote reaches. The first documented anomalies emerged in 1904, when brothers Willie and Frank MacLeod, Metis prospectors from Fort Liard, ventured into the valley seeking lost gold. They were seasoned outdoorsmen, equipped with rifles, supplies, and knowledge of the land, yet they vanished without trace. 2 years later, in 1906, their skeletons were discovered by another party near the South Nahanni River, bones scattered, skulls missing, as if severed cleanly with an axe or knife. RCMP reports from the era, preserved in Northwest Territories archives, noted no signs of animal scavenging. The cuts were precise, almost ritualistic, and personal items like watches and boots lay untouched nearby, suggesting no robbery motive. The MacLeod's fate might have been dismissed as a tragic accident, perhaps a bear attack or territorial dispute, but the pattern repeated with chilling consistency. In 1917, Swiss prospector Martin Jorgensen entered the valley, building a cabin near the confluence of the Flat and South Nahanni rivers. He was a solitary figure, much like the Yukon's own reclusive trappers, but his end was gruesome. Trappers found his cabin burned to the ground, Jorgensen's headless corpse propped against a tree nearby, rifle clutched in rigor mortis hands. The fire had been deliberate, accelerants traced in soil samples analyzed decades later by forensic teams, yet his body showed no burn marks, implying he was decapitated post-mortem and positioned as a warning. Historical accounts in the book Dangerous River by R.M. Patterson, no relation, detail how Jorgensen's head was never recovered, fueling speculation of a curse. By the 1920s, the valley earned its infamous moniker, Valley of Headless Men, as more bodies surfaced. In 1921, Yukon trapper John O'Brien disappeared while scouting Nahanni tributaries. His decapitated remains were found a year later, clothing torn as if in a frenzied struggle, but again, no head. As a ranger, I patrolled these same canyons, often alone for weeks, the isolation a double-edged sword, peaceful yet oppressive, the constant roar of the river masking subtle sounds that set nerves on edge. The Nahanni spans over 30,000 square kilometers, much of it inaccessible except by floatplane or canoe, with sheer cliffs rising 1,200 meters, creating echo chambers where whispers amplify into screams. During my first season in 1986, I dismissed the legends as hyperbole, but a routine search for overdue hikers changed everything. Two brothers from Whitehorse, Yukon, avid adventurers named Kyle and Derek Simmons, had canoed into the valley, planning a 2-week trip to map undocumented caves. They vanished on day 5. We mobilized a search party, including our CMP officers and Dean guides, combing the riverbanks where mist clings like spectral fingers. On the 7th day, we found their campsite near Rabbit Kettle Hot Springs, tents slashed, gear scattered, blood spatters on the rocks forming arcane patterns that resembled Dean's symbols for Guardian. Kyle's body was discovered downstream, wedged in a crevice, decapitated, the wound cauterized as if by intense heat, though no fire evidence existed. Derek's remains turned up 2 miles away, similarly mutilated, head gone. Autopsies from the Yukon coroner's office, cross-jurisdictional due to proximity, revealed death by blunt force trauma, but the decapitations occurred perimortem, blood loss minimal, suggesting the killer possessed surgical skill in sub-zero conditions. The paranoia set in during that search, the feeling of being watched from the cliffs, shadows flitting at peripheral vision, vanishing when turned upon. Our Dean guide, Elder Joseph Nahanni, a pseudonym for privacy, muttered prayers, warning of the Naha spirits awakened by intruders. He recounted how, in 1945, trapper Ernest Savard was found headless in his burned cabin, mirroring Jorgensen's fate, as detailed in RCMP file #1945-07-22. Savard's diary, partially recovered, described hearing whispers in the wind, calling my name, promising gold if I surrender my thoughts. The valley's geology amplifies this uncanniness. Karst formations create underground rivers and sinkholes that swallow men whole. Hot springs emit sulfurous fumes inducing hallucinations, and magnetic anomalies, noted in geological surveys by Natural Resources Canada, disrupt compasses, leading wanderers in circles toward doom. The horrors escalated in 1997, when a floatplane carrying Yukon geologist David Hilders and pilot Blake Lamb crashed into the river near the Cirque of the Unclimbables, towering spires that loom like judgmental sentinels. The wreckage was found, but bodies missing. Weeks later, Hilda's decapitated torso washed up at Nahanni Butte, head absent, as reported in CBC News archives from August 1997. Lamb's remains surfaced decapitated miles away, personal effects intact. No crash survivors could have inflicted such wounds, and wildlife experts ruled out animals, cuts too clean, no teeth marks. I led the recovery team, the dread visceral, the water's chill seeping through waders, the metallic scent of blood lingering despite the current, and at night, campfires flickering as if unseen hands fanned the flames. One ranger, Tom Erickson, snapped, claiming shadows detached from canyon walls, pursuing him with elongated necks, whispering decapitation threats. He was medevaced, diagnosed with acute psychosis, but his journal echoed Savard's. They want our heads, our minds, to guard the secrets. Modern incidents perpetuate the curse. In 2005, as per RCMP Unsolved Case #2005-07-08, prospective Fred Burm's cabin burned, his headless body floating downstream. Burm, from Yukon's Mayo area, had journaled about headless figures in the mist, aligning with eyewitness reports from hikers. During my last patrol in 2009, I experienced it firsthand. Alone at a remote outpost near the gate of Hell Rapids, I awoke to scratching outside my tent, nails on fabric, rhythmic like a code. Peering out, I saw silhouettes against the moonlight, tall, humanoid shapes with voids where heads should be, moving with jerky precision. I fired warning shots, the echoes reverberating like laughter, and they dissolved into fog. The next morning, footprints encircled the site, bare, human-like, but elongated, leading to a sinkhole that dropped into abyss. Soil samples showed no DNA, but paranoia lingered. I felt eyes on my neck, a constant itch as if measuring for severance. The Nahanni's isolation amplifies this terror, cell service non-existent, rescue days away, the landscape a maze where paranoia festers. Theories abound, serial killers using the remoteness, as speculated in Headless Valley Myths Dispelled article from Maclean's magazine, 1930s reprint, or cryptids like the Wahila, a beowulf hybrid from Dean Law. But the consistency, decapitations, fires, vanishings, points to something uncanny, a land cursed by disturbed spirits. Parks Canada restricts access, but adventurers still vanish. In 2018, 2 Yukon kayakers disappeared, kayaks found intact, personal items strewn, with bloody handprints on rocks forming headless outlines. Retired now in Whitehorse, the shadows follow, mirrors reflect fleeting decapitated forms, winds whisper names. This true chronicle, drawn from RCMP dossiers, indigenous testimonies, and my logs, warns that Nahanni's curse endures, its isolation a trap where dread creeps, paranoia consumes, and doom claims the head as tribute. My name is Evelyn Kogvik, and I am a descendant of the Inuvialuit people who have called the Arctic shores of the Yukon home for countless generations. For over a decade, from 1998 to 2010, I worked as a cultural liaison for Parks Canada on Herschel Island Chikiktarik Territorial Park, a remote speck of land in the Beaufort Sea, 5 kilometers off the Yukon's northern coast. This island, frozen in time under the endless polar night, is a place of stark beauty, where tundra meets ice, where bowhead whales once drew whalers from across the globe, and where the wind carries whispers of anguish that pierce the soul. I came to preserve our heritage, to share stories of my ancestors who thrived in this unforgiving land. But what I encountered was a legacy of horror that clings to the island like frost to bone. This is the true account of the unexplained vanishings and eerie apparitions that haunt Herschel Island, rooted in historical records from the Yukon archives, RCMP reports, and my own experiences that turned the Arctic silence into a symphony of dread. What began as tales of lost whalers in the 1890s has persisted into modern times, an unrelenting force that hollows the eyes of the living, breeding paranoia and promising doom in a place where isolation is absolute and escape is a fantasy. Herschel Island's dark history begins in the late 19th century, when it became a bustling hub for American and European whalers chasing bowhead whales during the Arctic whaling boom. By 1890, the island hosted up to 1,500 men during peak season, their wooden ships anchored in Pauline Cove, their camps a chaotic sprawl of tents and shanties. The Inuvialuit, my people, traded furs and knowledge for goods, but the influx brought disease. Smallpox and measles decimated our communities, as noted in missionary records from the Anglican Church of Canada, archived in Whitehorse. The whalers also brought violence and greed, their drunken brawls and exploitation of the land leaving scars that linger. By 1894, the whale population crashed, and the industry collapsed, leaving behind abandoned ships, rotting storehouses, and graves that dot the tundra like silent sentinels. The island became a ghost town, save for a small RCMP detachment established in 1903 to assert Canadian sovereignty and monitor the Inuvialuit, who were seen as potential threats by colonial authorities. The first documented horror emerged in 1896, when the whaling ship Jesse H. Freeman ran aground during a storm, its crew of 12 vanishing without a trace. Ship's logs from the Yukon archives describe the wreck found intact, sails furled, provisions untouched, but no bodies, only bloodstains on the deck, smeared in patterns suggesting a struggle, and crewmen's boots lined up neatly at the bow, as if they had walked willingly into the icy sea. Inuvialuit elders, as recorded in oral histories by the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation, spoke of a hollow-eyed spirit that lured men from their ships, their eyes drained of life, faces frozen in expressions of terror. These stories were dismissed as superstition by early RCMP officers, but the pattern persisted. In 1908, trapper Samuel Carter, stationed on the island to hunt foxes, disappeared after reporting to the RCMP that he saw men with no eyes walking the shore at night. His tent was found shredded, personal items scattered, and his journal, recovered by the RCMP and stored in territorial records, described figures that stared without seeing, their sockets black voids that seemed to pull at his sanity. When I arrived on Herschel Island in 1998, I was skeptical of these tales. My role was to guide visitors, mostly researchers and rare tourists, through the island's historic sites, the old whaling station, the RCMP barracks, and the Inuvialuit sod houses preserved as cultural landmarks. The island is accessible only by boat or small plane, a 70-kilometer journey from Tuktoyaktuk across waters that freeze solid for 9 months of the year. The isolation is total, radio communication is spotty, and winter storms can trap you for weeks, the polar night stretching for 2 months of unrelenting darkness. My first season was uneventful, but in the winter of 1999, during a maintenance check with 2 colleagues, biologist Peter Clarkson and ranger Thomas Nanak, we encountered something that shattered my disbelief. It was mid-December, the sun long vanished, temperatures plunging to -45 degrees Celsius, the wind a howling beast that rattled the wooden walls of the community house where we stayed. We were inspecting the old Pacific Steam Whaling Company storehouse, a dilapidated structure listed in Parks Canada's inventory, when we noticed footprints in the snow, bare, human-sized, circling the building in a perfect spiral. No one else was on the island. Our plane was the only transport, grounded by the storm. The prints were fresh, snowflakes yet to fill them, and led toward the shore before vanishing into the frozen sea. Peter, a pragmatic scientist, suggested wind erosion mimicking tracks, but the precision unnerved us. That night, as we huddled by a propane heater, the air grew heavy with a metallic tang, like blood spilled on ice. Then came the scratching, faint at first, like fingernails on wood, circling the house. Thomas grabbed his rifle, shouting into the darkness, but the wind swallowed his voice. Through the frosted window, I glimpsed movement, tall, emaciated figures, their faces obscured by hoods, but where eyes should have been, only black hollows stared back, reflecting the dim glow of our lantern-like twin abysses. The dread was visceral, a tightening in the chest that made breathing a struggle. We barricaded the door, but the scratching intensified, now accompanied by whispers, guttural, unintelligible, yet laced with despair, as if pleading and threatening simultaneously. Peter's radio crackled, picking up static laced with distorted voices. "No eyes, join us." The words matched those in Carter's 1908 journal, chilling me to the core. Thomas, an Inuvialuit elder, burned sage, chanting prayers to appease the spirits, but the air grew colder, the walls creaking as if squeezed by unseen hands. By dawn, the sounds ceased, but we found the storehouse door ajar, its interior trashed, barrels overturned, tools scattered, and a single whalebone harpoon driven into the floor, surrounded by blood that froze into grotesque patterns, later analyzed by RCMP as human but untraceable to any known individual, case file #1999-12-15. The incidents escalated over the years. In 2003, a research team from the University of Alberta vanished while studying permafrost melt near the island's eastern cliffs. Their boat was found adrift, equipment intact, but blood coated the deck, and their logbook, recovered by Parks Canada, described eyeless figures watching from the tundra. A 2007 search found no bodies, only a single severed finger, its owner unidentified. RCMP reports note similar vanishings. In 1987, trapper Paul Tuk-Tuk disappeared, his camp littered with eyeless carvings etched into driftwood. In 1994, pilot Marie Carmack crashed her Cessna, her body missing, but her goggles found miles away, lenses shattered as if crushed by immense pressure. Each case mirrored the historical pattern: blood, vanishings, and the absence of eyes, as if the spirits claimed vision itself. My breaking point came in January 2009, during a solo patrol near the Anglican Mission ruins. The polar night was oppressive, the only light from my headlamp cutting through swirling snow. I heard footsteps crunching behind me, deliberate, matching my pace. Turning, I saw nothing but felt a gaze, empty, suffocating, like voids boring into my skull. My headlamp flickered, revealing a figure 20 meters away, tall, cloaked in tattered furs, its face a hollow mask, eye sockets gaping like twin wounds. I ran, heart pounding, the crunching footsteps pursuing, now joined by others, a chorus of unseen hunters. I reached the community house, locking myself in, but the windows frosted over with patterns resembling eyeless faces. The radio screamed static, voices chanting my name in Inuvialuit, a language I spoke but now twisted into something profane. I burned my sage bundle, praying, but the air thickened with decay, the scent of rotting flesh and sea salt. Morning brought silence, but my mirror reflected not my face but hers, eyeless, mouth open in a silent scream. I left the island the next week, never returning. Retired in Whitehorse, the paranoia lingers. Every shadow seems to lack eyes, every gust carries whispers. Herschel Island's curse, verified by Yukon archives, RCMP logs, and Inuvialuit testimonies, endures as a testament to a land where isolation breeds terror, the uncanny stalks, and doom hollows the gaze of the living. My name is Clara Seton, and I am a Champagne and Aishihik First Nations elder who served as a cultural guide in Quain National Park and Reserve, Yukon Territory, from 1995 to 2015. Nestled in the southwest corner of the Yukon, Quain is a land of towering peaks, glacier that grind like ancient gods, and ice fields that stretch beyond the horizon, swallowing light and sound. I grew up hearing stories of our ancestors' reverence for this place, where the spirits of the mountains, known to us as Luagarai, demanded respect from those who tread their domain. As a guide, I led climbers, researchers, and tourists through the rugged trails, sharing tales of survival and sacred balance. But beneath the beauty lies a darkness that has haunted Quain for centuries, a curse that manifests as a chilling chorus of wails echoing from the ice, driving men to madness and death. This is the true account of the Quain Icefield's horrors, grounded in oral histories of my people, Parks Canada incident reports, and my own encounters that transformed the silent majesty of the glacier into a nightmare of creeping dread. What began as whispers of lost gold seekers in the 1800s persists as an unrelenting force, where isolation amplifies paranoia, and the frozen choir claims souls with a song no human can resist. The Quain region's dark legacy predates written records, rooted in the oral traditions of the Champagne and Aishihik, documented by the Yukon Native Language Center. Our elders spoke of the Luagarai, mountain spirits who sang through the ice to guide or doom travelers based on their respect for the land. To disturb a sacred site, burial grounds, ancient camps, or glacier caves, was to invite the choir's wrath, a wailing that burrowed into the mind, compelling victims to wander until the cold claimed them. The Klondike gold rush of the 1890s brought outsiders who ignored these warnings, their greed desecrating the ice fields. In 1897, a party of 6 prospectors from Dawson City ventured into the Lowell Glacier, seeking a rumored motherlode. They vanished, but their camp was found months later by Tlingit traders, as noted in Yukon archives. Tents shredded, tools buried in snow, and strange carvings in the ice, spirals and jagged lines resembling screams frozen in time. A single survivor, half-mad, staggered into Burwash Landing, babbling of voices in the ice that sang his companions to their deaths. His body was found frozen days later, eyes wide, mouth agape as if screaming, with no visible cause of death, per RCMP report #1897-09-12. This pattern of vanishings and eerie sounds continued. In 1923, trapper Angus MacLean disappeared while hunting near the Kaskawulsh Glacier. His remains were found the following spring, sprawled on the ice, fingers clawing at his ears as if to block out sound, according to a coroner's report in the Yukon archives. His journal, partially recovered, described a choir of whales that grew louder each night, urging him to join the ice. By the 1960s, climbers tackling Mount Logan, Canada's highest peak at 5,959 meters, reported similar phenomena, harmonic drones rising from crevasses, like voices led in anguish, causing disorientation and panic. A 1967 expedition, documented in Parks Canada logs, lost 2 members who wandered from camp during a blizzard, their tracks leading to a crevasse where their gear lay abandoned, ice walls etched with the same spiral patterns noted decades earlier. When I began guiding in 1995, I approached these stories with respect but skepticism, attributing them to the icefield's natural acoustics. Wind through crevasses can mimic human cries, as geologists from Natural Resources Canada explained. Quain's isolation is profound. The park spans 21,980 square kilometers, much of it glacier-covered, accessible only by foot, ski, or helicopter. Winter temperatures drop to -50 degrees Celsius, and summer brings relentless mosquitoes and sudden storms. I led groups to safe routes, teaching them to honor the land with offerings, sage, tobacco, or prayers, as my elders taught me. But in July 1999, during a trek to the Donjek Glacier with 3 researchers from Vancouver, the icefields revealed their terror. We were camped near a moraine, the glacier's edge glowing under the midnight sun, when a low hum began, like distant chanting. It grew into wails, piercing, overlapping, as if dozens of voices cried in unison, emanating from the ice itself. The researchers, equipped with audio gear, recorded the sound, later analyzed by the University of British Columbia as non-natural, with human-like vocal frequencies. One researcher, Dr. Lisa Chen, became agitated, claiming the whales formed words. "Come, deeper." That night, she wandered from her tent, ignoring our shouts. We found her at dawn, 2 kilometers away, standing on a glacier's edge, staring into a crevasse, her face drained of color, muttering, "They are singing my name." Her eyes were bloodshot, pupils dilated, as if she'd seen something beyond comprehension. We airlifted her out. She never spoke of it again but quit her career, haunted by recurring nightmares of eyeless faces in the ice, as she later confided to me. The incidents multiplied. In 2004, a climbing team of 4 from Germany vanished near Mount Hubbard. Their base camp, found by a Parks Canada rescue team, was intact, but their ropes were cut cleanly, as if by a blade, and ice nearby bore those spiral carvings. RCMP case #2004-06-19 noted no bodies recovered, only a blood-stained ice axe with no traceable DNA. In 2008, I guided a solo hiker, Yukon local Mark Klingit, to the Steel Glacier. He was experienced, but one evening, he grew erratic, claiming the ice sang promises of rest. I restrained him from running toward a crevasse, his screams drowning out my own. The next morning, his tent was empty, his tracks leading to a sheer ice wall where a single handprint froze in blood, no body in sight. The RCMP classified it as a hypothermic delusion, but I saw his eyes before he vanished, hollow, as if the choir had already claimed his soul. My final encounter came in March 2014, during a solo patrol to monitor glacier retreat. The polar twilight cast an eerie blue over the ice fields, the silence so heavy it pressed against my chest. Then it began, a wail, soft at first, rising from the Lowell Glacier, swelling into a chorus that vibrated through my bones. I recorded it on my phone, the sound later verified by Parks Canada as anomalous, unmatched to known environmental sources. As I trekked back, the ice cracked behind me, footsteps echoing out of sync with my own. Turning, I saw shadows, humanoid, faceless, their forms blurring into the snow. They sang my name, "Clara, join us," in voices that mimicked my mother's, dead since 1980. Panic seized me. I ran, slipping on ice, my headlamp catching glints of spiral carvings that seemed to pulse. Reaching my snowmobile, I fled, but the whales followed, fading only when I crossed the park's boundary. My recording, analyzed later, contained layered voices speaking in southern Tuchone, my people's language, but twisted into phrases of eternal entrapment. The isolation of Quain amplifies this horror. No cell service, no roads, only the ice and sky as witnesses. Theories range from infrasound causing hallucinations, as studied by the Geological Survey of Canada, to indigenous curses angered by colonial desecration. But the consistency, whales, carvings, vanishings, points to something alive in the ice, a choir that feeds on fear. Recent incidents, like the 2020 disappearance of a white horse skier, RCMP case #2020-03-10, whose gear was found with spiral etchings, confirm the curse endures. Now retired in Haines Junction, I hear the whales in my dreams, see spirals and frost on my windows. This true chronicle, drawn from Parks Canada records, RCMP files, and my testimony, warns that Quain's icefields harbor a frozen choir, where paranoia festers, dread creeps, and doom sings its eternal song. My name is Henry Dubois, and I'm a retired bartender who worked at the Crimson Vale Saloon in Dawson City, Yukon Territory, from 1990 to 2012. Dawson City, the heart of the Klondike Gold Rush, is a place frozen in time, wooden boardwalks, dirt streets, and buildings that lean under the weight of history. The Crimson Vale, a ramshackle tavern built in 1898, was my home for over 2 decades, serving miners, tourists, and locals who craved its gritty charm. I went there seeking a quiet life, pouring drinks while swapping tales of the Gold Rush days. But the saloon held secrets darker than the Yukon's endless winter nights, secrets that bled into the present with a ferocity that turned the air itself red with dread. This is the true account of the Crimson Vale's hauntings, rooted in Yukon Archives records, RCMP incident reports, and my own encounters with a malevolent force that stained the saloon's walls with blood and paranoia. What began as whispers of murdered prospectors in the 1890s became a relentless terror that drove patrons mad, their screams echoing in a place where isolation breeds fear and doom paints the night crimson. The Crimson Vale's history is soaked in violence. Built during the Klondike Gold Rush, it was a hotspot for prospectors flush with gold dust, gamblers, and dance hall girls. Its name came from a red velvet curtain that separated the bar from a backroom where high-stakes poker games and darker dealings unfolded. Yukon Archives document a string of murders in the saloon's early years. In 1899, prospector Silas Reed was stabbed over a disputed claim, his blood pooling beneath the curtain, as reported in the Klondike Nugget. In 1901, dancehall girl Ruby Malone vanished after a brawl. Her shawl, stained red, was found behind the curtain, but her body never surfaced. By 1903, the saloon's owner, Jedediah Holt, was found dead in the backroom, throat slit, his eyes wide with terror. The RCMP report, #1903-04-15, noted no suspects, but locals whispered of a crimson veil that appeared on the walls, blood seeping from nowhere, forming shapes like faces screaming in agony. Tlingit elders, whose oral histories I later recorded for the Yukon Historical Society, called it a blood spirit, a vengeful entity born of greed and violence, cursing the saloon to trap souls in its walls. When I started bartending in 1990, the stories were just that, stories to spook tourists. The saloon hadn't changed much since the Gold Rush: creaky floors, a warped bar counter, and that same red curtain, faded but heavy with age, still hanging in the back. Dawson City's population barely hit 1,300, and winter cut us off from Whitehorse, 500 kilometers away, with roads buried under snow. The isolation was palpable, the kind that makes you hear things in the silence: creaks, whispers, the clink of glasses when no one's there. My first hint of trouble came in January 1992, during a blizzard that trapped me and a few regulars inside. The power flickered, and the curtain swayed, though no draft stirred the air. A low moan rose, like a choked sob, coming from the back room. I checked, finding nothing but a cold spot that froze my breath, and on the wall behind the curtain, a faint red stain appeared, fresh, wet, smelling of iron. I scrubbed it clean, but the regulars, old miners like Pete Callahan, swore they saw faces in the grain of the wood, eyes pleading for release. The hauntings escalated. In 1997, a tourist from Calgary, Ellen Marsh, stayed late, fascinated by the saloon's history. She was sketching the curtain when she screamed, claiming it bled, soaking her hands red. Her sketchbook, later examined by RCMP, case #1997-02-08, showed frantic drawings of distorted faces, mouths open in silent wails. She fled Dawson the next day, but her car crashed on the Klondike Highway, her body found with bloodshot eyes, as if she'd seen something unbearable. The coroner ruled it an accident, but locals whispered she was running from the Vale. By 2001, staff reported glasses shattering spontaneously, spilling whiskey that looked red in the dim light. One night, as I locked up, the jukebox, unplugged for years, blared a warped version of a Gold Rush ballad, The Spell of the Yukon, the lyrics twisting into blood binds you hear. I yanked the plug, but the music lingered, echoing in my skull, paranoia creeping in like frost. The worst came in December 2005, during the polar night when Dawson's streets lay empty under a sky heavy with auroras. A group of locals, miners, a teacher, and a historian named Sarah Tuttle, gathered for a poker night in the back room. Around midnight, the temperature plummeted, though the heater roared. The curtain billowed, and blood poured from its folds, pooling on the floor, defying physics. Sarah screamed, claiming hands reached from the walls, their fingers dripping red. We fled, but the historian stayed, transfixed, muttering about souls trapped in the Vale. The next morning, Sarah was gone. Her coat and boots were found behind the curtain, soaked in blood that matched no known type, per RCMP Forensic Report #2005-12-19. Her tracks led to the Yukon River, frozen solid, and vanished at the ice's edge. Search parties found nothing, but for weeks, patrons reported her voice screaming from the backroom, begging to be freed. My breaking point was in 2010. Alone after closing, I heard laughter, harsh, guttural, like a crowd of unseen prospectors. The curtain pulsed, as if breathing, and blood seeped across the floor, forming words, "Stay forever." I grabbed a knife, slashing the curtain, but it bled, soaking my hands. Faces appeared in the fabric, Silas, Ruby, Jedediah, their eyes hollow, mouths stretched in torment. I ran, locking the saloon, but the laughter followed, echoing through Dawson's empty streets. I quit the next day, moving to Whitehorse, but the paranoia clung. Mirrors show fleeting red stains, and my dreams are filled with the curtain's sway, its fabric whispering my name. The Crimson Vale Saloon remains open, a draw for thrill seekers, but incidents persist. In 2018, a bartender reported blood dripping from the ceiling, forming faces that screamed silently, as noted in a Yukon News article, July 10, 2018. RCMP logs from 2020 document a patron's disappearance, his wallet left behind the curtain, blooded without a source. Tlingit elders say the spirit feeds on greed and despair, thriving in Dawson's isolation, where winter traps you with your fears. This true chronicle, drawn from Yukon archives, RCMP files, and my testimony, warns that the Crimson Vale's curse endures, its blooded veil a trap where paranoia festers, dread creeps, and doom claims all who linger too long. My name is Agnes Tlingit, and I am a Northern Tutchone elder who served as a cultural interpreter for Yukon's Fort Selkirk historic site from 1992 to 2014. Fort Selkirk, a remote trading post on the Yukon River, sits where the Pelly and Yukon rivers meet, a place of profound beauty and deep history for my people. Surrounded by dense forests and jagged mountains, it's accessible only by boat or plane, its isolation a cloak that hides secrets older than the land itself. I came to share stories of our ancestors, who thrived here long before Hudson's Bay Company traders arrived in the 1840s. But what I uncovered was a terror that gnaws at the soul, a curse tied to bones that vanish and reappear, harvested by unseen hands. This is the true account of the horrors haunting Fort Selkirk, grounded in Northern Tutchone oral histories, Yukon government heritage records, and my own chilling experiences that turned the river's whisper into a scream of dread. What began as tales of missing traders in the 1800s persists as a gruesome force, collecting bones in the shadows, breeding paranoia in the Yukon's unforgiving wilds where doom stalks those who linger. Fort Selkirk's dark past began long before European contact. Northern Tutchone oral traditions, preserved by the Yukon Native Language Center, speak of the bone collectors, spirits who guarded sacred burial grounds along the river. To disturb these sites, by theft, greed, or disrespect, was to invite their wrath, a punishment that stripped flesh from bone, leaving only skeletal offerings to appease the land. When Chilkat Tlingit traders, our rivals, raided the area in 1852, burning the original Hudson's Bay post, elders reported bones vanishing from graves, only to reappear arranged in eerie patterns, circles, spirals, or stacked like totems. The first documented horror came in 1863, when trader James McAllister disappeared while restocking the rebuilt fort. His journal, recovered by the Hudson's Bay Company and archived in Whitehorse, described hands in the mist stealing bones from his campfire kills, followed by whispers urging him to give his own. His body was found a month later, per RCMP report #1863-11-07, stripped to the skeleton, skull missing, bones arranged in a spiral on the riverbank, untouched by scavengers. The pattern continued. In 1899, during the Klondike Gold Rush's tail end, prospector Eliza Grant vanished near Fort Selkirk while panning the Pelly River. Her camp, found by a Tuchone hunter, contained her gear but no body, only a pile of animal bones, meticulously cleaned, arranged in a circle with a human femur at the center, later identified as hers via dental records, Yukon archives. In 1936, trapper Simon Leclerc went missing. His skeleton was discovered in a cave, bones polished and stacked, skull absent, as noted in RCMP file #1936-03-22. Locals whispered of the collectors, their presence marked by a faint hum, like bones clattering in the wind, and a chill that clung despite summer heat. By the time I arrived in 1992, Fort Selkirk was a preserved historic site, its log cabins and trading post restored, but the isolation, hours from the nearest town, Mayo, by boat, made every creek feel like a summons. My first encounter came in August 1994, guiding a group of archaeologists studying Tuchone artifacts. We camped near the old cemetery, where unmarked graves held both indigenous and settler remains. At dusk, a low hum rose from the river, like bones rattling in a sack. One archaeologist, Dr. Neil Fraser, noticed bones, deer, fox, hare, piled neatly outside his tent, though we'd seen no animals. That night, he woke screaming, claiming hands reached from the soil, bony fingers clutching his ankles. We found scratches on his legs, deep but bloodless, and the bone pile had grown, now including a human rib, untraceable per later RCMP analysis, #1994-08-17. Neil left the next day, but his notes, shared with me, described a presence that wanted my bones. The hum followed us, louder in the cemetery, where graves appeared disturbed, soil sunken as if something had crawled out. The horrors intensified. In 2001, a Parks Canada ranger, Emily Quack, vanished during a solo patrol. Her boat was found adrift, filled with polished bones, moose, bear, and a human jawbone, unidentified, RCMP #2001-06-04. Her tracks led to a clearing where bones formed a spiral, scented by her hat, stained with a chalky residue that baffled forensics. In 2008, I led a youth group learning traditional Tuchone fishing. One night, the hum became a wail, and a teen, Michael Casca, wandered off, drawn to the river. We found him at dawn, catatonic, staring at a pile of bones, animal and human, arranged like a shrine. He whispered of bone hands, pulling him toward the water, his eyes glassy with terror. He never spoke again, institutionalized in Whitehorse, his case logged as hypothermia-induced psychosis, RCMP #2008-07-19. My final encounter was in September 2013, during a routine site check. Alone, I heard the hum, now a chorus of clattering, rising from the forest. Near the old trading post, I found a fresh bone pile, elk, caribou, and a human skull, polished to a sheen, no DNA match per RCMP analysis, #2013-09-10. The air grew heavy, reeking of damp earth and decay. Shadows moved in the trees, skeletal forms with glowing sockets, their fingers long and bone-white, reaching. I ran, tripping over roots, the hum chasing me like a swarm. In my cabin, I barred the door, but bones rattled outside, piling against the walls. At dawn, they were gone, but my mirror showed my reflection with hollow sockets, my own bones outlined as if marked for harvest. I resigned, fleeing to Whitehorse, but the hum lingers in my dreams, bones clattering in the dark. Fort Selkirk remains a historic site, but incidents persist. In 2019, a visitor reported bones appearing overnight, arranged in spirals, Yukon News, August 3, 2019. RCMP logs from 2021 note a missing canoeist, their paddle found amid bone piles. Northern Tuchone elders say the collectors guard the land, punishing those who disturb its sanctity. The isolation, no roads, no signals, breeds paranoia, amplifying the dread of unseen hands. This true chronicle, drawn from Yukon records, RCMP files, and my testimony, warns that Fort Selkirk's bone collectors endure, their gruesome harvest a trap where fear festers and doom claims the unwary.